Hello and welcome to this part of the video training for the annual plan 2012-13. In this section I'm going to take you through completing the transaction sheet. The transaction sheet is a new sheet this year. It's only intended for those foundation trusts which have taken over the NHS services of another body in a transaction, either through transfer and community services or separately. The sheet is new this year because in last year's template it was possible for trusts to enter the effects of a transaction in three ways: as a service development, as an income generating scheme, or as mere changes to income in an existing work service. So this year we've asked people, trusts with transactions, to use the transaction sheet. The transaction sheet can be found from the index and is laid out like many of the other sheets. The top section is a summation of what's below. Below there are sections for two different transactions. For each transaction there's a set of income lines which are expected to be recurrent income lines, and expense lines which are intended to be recurrent expense lines. Once the transaction is laid out here, the relevant income and expense are transferred to the plan area for that income stream or expense stream, and from there they are transferred to your statement of comprehensive income. That's how it links together. For the purposes of this, you need to give your transaction a name so that it can be uniquely recognized, and to import figures. In this example I'm going to be inputting figures for a transaction that has 4 million income and 3.8 million of costs or so. It's obvious that transactions won't all begin at the start of the year. So let's, once the transaction is up and running, it will generate a steady income, but the start of the transaction can be phased across any particular time of the year that you wish to demonstrate it. Let me show you one starting at the beginning of the year. Just for these purposes I will use outpatient revenue, but each of these income streams is dealt with identically, and I could be using any one. This is not specific to anything. So if it were to start at the start of the year, you'd have an extra million income in each quarter, you'd have extra pay in each quarter, and extra non-operating expense or clinical supplies. We'll use clinical supplies here. And it's really straightforward and obvious. The net effect is shown, the net effect is transferred up there, and if we go to the acute outpatient revenue, the plan sheet, you can see that the effect of the plan transaction comes in as a 4 million in the first year. Now within this there is tariff and non-tariff. If you expect some proportion of that to be non-tariff, then you can put it in here. Say 3 million is non-tariff, and you'll find that self-consistency is maintained, this being 1, that being 3, and it tying back to 4 million income per the transaction. I'll just delete that. We'll go back to the transaction sheet. Okay, this is the trivial case. The case where you start more at a particular month in the year is slightly more complicated. So let's undertake that. Say we start in the last month of the first half of the year. So we would generate that much income, that much costs, but obviously this doesn't reflect there'll be a 4 million effect in the second year for a full year effect. So you need to put the missing amounts from the first year into the second year. So 1.667 minus 1 minus 0.5. Okay, so then if we go back to the acute outpatient plan, first year's effects 2.33, second year's effect 1.667. The net effect is 4 million of the transaction, which becomes apparent as the year-on-year increase in the second year. Okay, and we've looked at the way it ties through to the acute outpatient. We'll also look through how it ties through to the clinical supplies expense, just to make sure it's obvious. Go to clinical supplies. There's a line due to changing clinical supplies expense due to transactions, and there you can see the amount. And that I put in the wrong line, so you'll see that in non-clinical supplies expense, which is there. Okay, that completes the transaction sheet. As you can see, summary of the transaction at the top and the way it feeds through. Thank you for listening.